access for this hybrid meeting, which we have designed with the intention of maximizing access by members of the public. For those joining the webinar online via Zoom or by phone, please note that your microphone is automatically muted when you join. In order to minimize the risk of background noise, you will not be able to unmute your phone yourself. For those joining online via Zoom, please note that the webinar platform does not enable video for attendees, so we will not be able to see you. If you need technical assistance during the meeting or have a question about the meeting process, there are a few ways to contact us. If you're using the online Zoom webinar, the best way is by using the Q&A function, which several members of our SGC team are monitoring. If you've joined by phone and you have access to email, please email sgc.info@sgc.ca.gov. If you do not have access to email, you may text or call 916-634-3359. If you plan to make in-person public comment, you must fill out a comment card provided at the table near the back of the room. Please fill out the public comment card to indicate your name and which item you'd like to comment on. You'll then bring that comment card to the table at the front to my right with the sign collecting public comment cards. When the chair opens the public comment period for your item, we will read the names of everyone who has submitted a form for that item. Please line up by the podium when I do so in the order in which I have called your name. When it is your turn to speak, I will call your name to the podium. If you plan to make remote public comment, you must be joining the meeting via Zoom, either through your desktop or phone. To make a public comment, go to sgc.ca.gov/meetings and complete the public comment form linked there. You'll need to complete separate forms for each item on which you wish to speak. You may complete a form at any time during the meeting. When the chair opens the public comment period for your item, we will read the names of everyone who has submitted a form for that item. When you hear your name in that list, please raise your hand. To do this online in the Zoom webinar, click the Raise Hand function under the Participants menu. To raise your hand by phone, you'll press *9. When it's your turn to speak, a member of our team will unmute your microphone. If you're online, you will see a window pop up alerting you that the host is unmuting you. You will need to click the option to approve unmute. After that, you can begin your comment. If you're on the phone, you will hear a recorded message alerting you that your line is unmuted. Please begin your comment after you hear the recorded message. If you're unable to complete the online form but would like to make a public comment, please email sgc.info@sgc.ca.gov. Each speaker will have a maximum of 2 minutes to make their remarks. A timer will be screen shared. Please monitor that and wrap up your remarks accordingly. Whether you are online or on the phone, you will be notified when your time is up. After that, we will mute your microphone. You do not need to take any additional action once we mute your microphone. Thank you all for your participation, and I will hand it back to the chair.
Great, thanks, Matt. Before I go to item 3, I just want to remind my colleagues that we will have a hard stop at 3, so we'll try to complete the agenda 3 p.m. So with that, we'll move to item 3, which is the approval of the December 15, 2022 meeting minutes. Members need not have attended these meetings to vote on them and the minutes adoption, but may abstain. So we'll have opportunity for council discussion, then public comments. That, Matt.
Need a motion and a second for the minutes.
So moved.
Got a motion and a second?
Second.
Second, you do a roll call, or no, we'll now take public comments.
We've received no public comments on this item.
Any discussion from council members? No, so we'll do a roll call.
Chair Sefa,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Kurgan,
Yes.
Secretary Crowfoot,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Musavi,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary D'Souza, Secretary Ross,
Yes.
Deputy Director Radhakrishna,
Yes.
Public Member Capretz,
Yes.
Public Member Cardenas,
Yes.
Chancellor Munoz.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Great. So moving on to the next item, item 4, I would like to call SGC Executive Director Lynn Bangkok-Libert for this item. It's a report and the Executive Director's report. And following that presentation, we'll have the opportunity for council to discuss. Then we'll have public comments right after that. Lynn?
Thank you, Chair Sefa. Good afternoon, council members. It's so nice to see you all. I'd like to start today by introducing a couple of new key team members that we have at the Strategic Growth Council. So Amar Sid, who's here with us today, Deputy Director of Community Investment and Planning. Marky Price, the Community Assistance for Climate Equity Team Program Associate. And Diana Zamora-Reyes, who California Council Science and Technology Science Fellow, and she has been assigned to the Climate Change Research Team. John Lee, who's also joining us today. He's joined SGC as our Senior Administrator, and Brianne Lagasa, who's joined as the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program Associate. So very excited to see our team continue to grow. Just a couple points from our programs. So the first is related to the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Program. We have a notice of funding for approximately $750 million, round 7, that was released on January 30th. This throughout February and March, SGC in partnership with the Housing and Community Development and the California Air Resources Board will be holding application workshops, hosting office hours, and providing technical assistance available at no cost to interested applicants. We will be receiving applications on April 4th, and then we will come back to the council on August 30th with a series of award recommendations for this NOFA. Secondly, just a couple quick notes on the governor's proposed January budget and the impact on SGC programs. So there are 2 places that the governor has proposed changes. The first is on the Community Resiliency Centers, which is a new program to SGC. The impact of this proposal is to delay $85 million of this fund from round 2 into round 3, so effectively making the program 3 rounds instead of 2 rounds. The second proposed change is related to the Transformative Climate Communities Program, and this is a reduction of $65 million in 2022-2023 and $40 million in 23-24. So this does maintain 75% of the current budget, and as we move into the next action item, we'll discuss more our strategy for that item. And wanted to also bring to you an update on Council Priority 3, which the Council adopted in December of last year. So this was the resolution on housing, climate, and equity. And it was, if you all remember, the steps that we took with the resolution was passed, and then we are going to come back to you all with an action plan for discussion about what steps we will be specifically taking to work through this resolution. Because this is a place where there is so much work that has been done all across the state, internally and externally, lots of thought partners who are also looking at similar topics, we thought it was prudent to do a request for information to ask for information about what stakeholders think would be important for us to focus our actions on, as well as to help us understand what else is happening in this landscape, so that we have that information as we then go through and finalize what actions that we as a council would recommend moving forward over the next 2 years. So this request for information is open and it's posted on our website now, and it will be open it will open on March 1st, and then it will run through the 31st of March. And then finally, I did want to give an update on the climate change research program. So as you are all very, very aware, over the last few years, the Climate Change Research Program has funded projects that have ushered science to action and advanced state priorities like extreme heat, resiliency, GHG reductions, and equity, with an emphasis on finding near-term solutions for communities. Over the last week, we've just seen another example of how this comes to fruition. The researchers at the Electric Power Research Institute, who were awarded in round 1, piloted an innovative financing solutions for the installment of Gradient's greenhouse gas reducing HVAC systems. And this was implemented in low-income communities in Fresno and Modesto. And as they have continued to work on this innovation, the New York City Housing Authority contacted them for 10,000 units of these types of HVAC systems. And also last week, Gradient announced an $18 million Series A investment in their company to continue to bring this technology to homes. So just in a course of, I guess it's 2.5 years, seeing an incredible movement from research to action to investment to being able to take an idea to scale is just really inspiring. And we wanted to share that with the council today. Now, drawing from that example, we also recognize that it's really hard. It's really hard to go from research to action. And as we've shared before, we think part of the solution is the climate change research engagement model, which enhances the scientific process by infusing capacity building, accountability, and coordination with community stakeholders in order to foster equitable partnership between academics, community experts, and facilitate the co-production of knowledge and advance actionable outcomes that increase resiliency in disadvantaged communities. So over the course of the last few months, we have developed this model on the SGC Model Hub to be able to showcase and share how that can be incorporated into other research programs. And as you'll all remember, in August, when we met in UC Merced, hosted by Chancellor Munoz, we also showcased the research model with a series of research partners at UC Merced. And from that conversation, there was a connection made with the UC Davis Center for Regional Change, where we discovered we had an opportunity to continue to improve and share this research engagement model with more California researchers. So as a result of that meeting and that conversation, we have now contracted with the UC Davis Center of Regional Change to compose a white paper that analyzes the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats faculty face doing community-based participatory research. They're also going to be creating an asset map of research units at UC and CSU campuses that have experience in this model and the capacity to offer training and coaching to their peers. And we'll also be identifying and selecting teams of academic and community partners to participate in pilot capacity building programs. So all of this is occurring. And then last week as well, we had a joint research workshop with the California Council on Science and Technology, where we brought together dozens of state and academic researchers to, again, talk about this model and how it can be applied within research. We just think that this is particularly important given last year's state budget provides $185 million to the UCs to do research. And we want to continue to support the implementers of this money by providing education and awareness of this model and how it responds to communities' desire to be more involved in the research process. So wanted to just continue to share updates as we continue our experimentation with building out models and working to take them to scale in other parts of the state. Okay, and with that, that concludes my executive director's report. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Matt, do we need to go to members?
We have no public comments on this item.
So we'll initiate council discussion. I want first start. So I think this idea of how you link from research to action is a critical issue. I'm really glad that you're looking into that. The reason I'm bringing that up is we are in multiple agencies and then within our own organization, we multiple types of research that we're doing to inform our decision, especially around climate. The key, I think you brought it up, not only the institutions, but the people who would be impacted or would benefit from this research. So making that bridge and that link is going to be really critical, especially in this time when we're trying to respond in a timely manner in some of the most pressing crises from climate change, drought, extreme heat, and all that. So all this climate research and from the data and information down to the ground where people really understand the relevance to them is going to be really critical. I'm glad to hear that you are exploring it not only with the universities, but also it is difficult to make that transition. But from what I've seen, I think the models and the experiences within within SGC, I think there's enough there to help us sort of chart the path to make it relevant as quickly and as immediately, as possible, because the change and the disaster that we're experiencing is not going to wait for us to do another research and another. I just want to make that comment. I'm opening it up.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Great report. Thank you, Lynn. I would, in relation to the climate research agenda and the program, I think it's excellent that you're coordinating with UC, given the amount of resources state leaders have provided to UC to do that research. Also, of course, the fifth climate assessment that is led by OPR in partnership with our agency. as well as all the work that the California Council on Science and Technology is doing with all of its members, which include academia and federally funded research institutions. So one important role for SGC in this work could be both a convener and a coordinator, not administratively, but more sort of thought leadership wide. If you think about the amount of funding going into climate research in all of its forms, it's vast. And I think a lot of times we're not connecting the dots between what one program is doing, even within the state, with what another program is conducting, or the research they're doing. And then it, that follows outside of the state as well. So the more that you all can be a hub through this and ensure that we're informing what research priorities the state has and breaking new ground in terms of innovative models around community-based research, I think it's excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. For our Health and Human Services Agency, a few comments. First of all, 10 pages, there's a lot of detail there that you didn't even get to, and things that we want to applaud that relate to our agency. So on the investment programs overall, we're really happy to see the support for rural and unincorporated communities, as well as tribal communities, and much of the technical assistance capacity building that you're providing. Even within the SALC program, there was details on support for tribes included in the definition of disadvantaged communities, and additional support for tribal land trusts that we want to support, reducing the match requirement for easements. A lot of details that really matter when it comes to operationalizing equity, something that we talked about. Second, on the climate change and research program, building off of Secretary Crowfoot's comments, there's a lot of government academic partnerships taking place, even coming out of the pandemic, towards an equitable recovery. We have certain initiatives, so we really want to applaud you for advancing community-based participatory research. We think there'll be greater dividends for many future partnerships between government and academia. And in particular, we're aware that some of the applications are aiming to address health and equity as well. So we hope that'll be included in the ultimate portfolio. We did want to also acknowledge around the regional climate planning initiatives that within our agency, there was a 25 million regional climate and health resilience planning grant program that, due to the budget, has been eliminated. We'll see how the budget outlook looks next year, but thanks for all the collaboration. We hope to stay engaged in other regional climate change planning efforts that would benefit our agency as well. And then finally, kudos to the Health and Equity Program on the Racial Equity Action Plan, strategies on community payment across many state advisory boards, the procedural and distributional equity aspects that are in there. We really support the alignment with the reparations task force, are things we're happy to see. And I'll end by, on this thread, announcing our agency has a new chief equity officer. His name is Daniel Torres. He started last week. He was a former senior advisor on immigration, has worked at the community level. So he'll be a key partner for that item and other items for our agency we wanted you to be aware of. But thanks for all the great work.
Else? Anyone else from our Zoom meeting? Joining us on Zoom. I'm sorry. Oh, Councilmember Capra.
Hey.
I didn't see your hand.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I know. So we are a huge fan of this new model, not new model, but the idea of scaling and replicating the model of CBO academic research. And we're part of 3 different conversations. And most of the time, the academic institution reached out to us. And so that's a great thing. But as we're moving forward, we're kind of seeing some different issues arise. And a couple of the ones to highlight is, one, that the institutions require a bulk of the grant, because that's just how the algorithm works, or how much they're, however the systems require. I don't know. I'm not really totally familiar with exactly how Secretary Munoz could probably articulate this better, but a lot of the grant has to go to the academic institution versus the CBOs is what I'm trying to say. So that becomes a barrier because we are small, nonprofit entities that don't really have capacity, number one, to even engage in writing a large grant. And 2, if we get the grant and there's a lot of deliverables, but there isn't a lot of funding to go with those deliverables, then we're kind of in a already disadvantaged position. And so we feel like we're not clear that we can actually engage the way the academic institution wants us to. And it's not the fault of any of the researchers or the professors or, you know, anybody who's writing the grant with us, but it's just kind of a flaw in the system of how these grants have to be, how they have to allocate funding. Not because, again, also not because of the way you all have written the grant, but just again, how the UC system kind of decides how much money researchers need, if that makes sense. So that's one issue. The other issue I would say is that a lot of cities don't want to sign the bottom line. They are reluctant and resistant to be accountable and to be responsible for any deliverables or even partnerships. That's kind of what we're seeing in both San Diego and Orange County, that it's hard to get cities because they're suspicious of the process. They're suspicious of the money. They don't really know what's going on. So I think there's kind of a lack of communication that people, you know, it was just kind of came out of the blue that there was $100 million in play. And so there's all this flurry of activity, but I think the cities never really got the message, you know, that they are also a key part of this process. And even the CBOs who were contacted like us didn't really understand the process or what was going on. And what our role would be. And so anyhow, it is a great thing. So I definitely don't want to suggest, I mean, this is like an incredible opportunity and we want to maximize what's possible. But just flagging some things that maybe we can work through as the process moves forward.
Else? None. We will now go to public comments.
We've received no public comment on this item.
Okay, so moving along, I'll move to item 5, which is an action item to adopt the Transformative Climate Communities Round 5 guidelines. I would like to invite Lynn again to introduce the item, and Amar Sid, SGC Deputy Director of Community Investment and Planning, to present. Then we'll have a council discussion followed by public comments.
Oh, actually, just 1 second, please. Thank you, Chair. And just before she speaks, I just wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about the reduction in the budget as it relates to the TCC program, just to kind of tee up what we're thinking as it relates to, because I know that'll be an important part of this conversation on this round of guidelines. So we had previously shared with the council that as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, the Federal Environmental Protection Agency has put together a $3 billion program that models after the Transformative Climate Communities program. So it's intentionally following what our lead here in California with the way it's structured, the eligible uses, and the way that it's being administered. The eligible applicants for this program are non-state entities. So it's municipalities, community-based organizations, UCs, tribes. And part of our solution to really meeting the moment is to bring together a contract where we would provide very robust, proactive technical assistance to the applicants that have either already received a TCC planning or implementation grant, as well as those who are kind of in the process of working towards a planning grant, to help provide direct assistance, education, support, all the way up from education and awareness, all the way up through supporting the grant application process to support them in their application to the federal program. And so we are going to be releasing a request for proposal. I think it's next week or sooner, and then get into contract by this summer, so that we have that capacity online to be very proactive and work to what we have our eyes on is about 12 to 15% of that federal pot of money. So really wanted to share that because I think that as we talk about round 5 and what we're doing with this program, I think it's important to know that we have this strategy to really bring and increase the amount of dollars that are available to California communities for TCC-like programming in the very near future. And with that, I will turn it over to Amar Sid.
On? Yeah, great. Thank you all. This is exciting. It's my first council meeting, so I feel really blessed to jump in on this presentation. We do have some of our support team from TCC. They're sitting at the table over there. So I'll go ahead and
Amar,
get
could you
started.
speak closer to the
Yeah.
mic a little bit?
How's this? Is this better? Great. All right. So I think first thing, I want to thank the SGC TCC staff for all of their hard work over the last several months on the draft guidelines, working with their counterparts over at DOC, OPR staff for support on the development of the mapping tool that I think makes it quite interesting to see where communities fall. And then also our interagency staff and community partners for all of their hard work in reviewing our draft guidelines and providing public comment. Okay, so for our guidelines, while making round 4 awards last fall, the team quickly pivoted into the round 5 guidelines. Large updates are informed by a couple of key areas. First, the team incorporated lessons learned and feedback from our ongoing grants for the first 3 rounds of this program. We are fortunate to be able to address many of the challenges that grantees are now facing with the implementation process, and I think you'll see that through the new draft. Second, the TCC team built on round 4 improvements that largely expanded access for disadvantaged unincorporated communities, tribes, and rural communities, with additional improvements gained through round 4 unincorporated application period and insight from the TA providers. This provides our applicants more space for the community connections. The TCC team released the draft guidelines in November for a 30-day public comment period. New to round 5, key changes and policy discussion memo was released and solicited for feedback. This policy document is going to be useful for our current guidelines and for future guidelines. The team also held in-person workshops for the first time in a couple of years, which was really exciting. Those workshops were held in Stockton, San Jose, and Riverside. The team also learned from successes from other programs like AHSC and hosted one-on-one Zoom calls for follow-up and discussion with external partners. Many of the public comments supported the new pilots that you'll see. They provided insight into addressing the barriers for the disadvantaged unincorporated communities, our tribes, and our rural areas, which incorporates into new guidelines for adoption today. Let's go to the next slide. As Lynn mentioned earlier, there is a reduction in the budget from January 10th, and so you'll see a difference from the draft guidelines where it was proposed as $165 million. So we're anticipating a release of $99.2 million for award. We'll also still be able to release the award of 3 grants around the award amount of $29.5 million each. You may also recall from round 4 awards, the recommendation left a surplus of about $10 million, which was approved for a new pilot grant type, the project development grants, that will address funding gaps between planning and implementation funding. TCC will make available multiple awards in different ranges up to $5 million. You'll also see the $900,000 that is available for up to 3 awards at $300,000 each for planning grants. The next slide, please. The next few slides will cover a few of the categories that highlight some of the updates for round 5. So first, this program will continue the pilot program started in round 4. The advanced pay pilot authorized through July 2025 will continue. And then we'll also have the new post-award consultation support grant for recent implementation grant awards. This is a bridge funding opportunity and grants to fund capacity for TCC communities to work on grant agreements for up to 6 months for that kind of in-between phase that alleviates a little bit of that burden that was previously unfunded for communities. This gap funding helps to ensure partners can stay plugged into the process in between award and execution. For round 5, the new project development grant pilot, which comes out of specific need in disadvantaged unincorporated communities for additional funding for basic infrastructure, pre-development costs, long-term operations, and maintenance planning. The proposals will still need to demonstrate prior community planning in line with TCC objectives. Go to the next slide, please. Second, for what's new in round 5, we're also building on round 4 efforts to expand accessibility to the disadvantaged unincorporated communities, rural communities, and tribal communities. Tribes can now request modification to certain requirements, such as indirect cost rates. Disadvantaged unincorporated communities will be prioritized for project development grants, since this concept aims to address their particular challenges. Tribes, however, past planning grantees, past implementation applications will also receive some of the funding priorities here. And then due to the different development patterns in rural areas, project areas are now expanded to 5 square miles, from 5 square miles to 10 square miles for rural communities only. The proposals must still show integration and connectivity within the proposed project area, and overall alignment with our TCC objectives to make concerted efforts into investment in the communities. And then also due to different development patterns, the disadvantaged unincorporated communities, tribes, and rural applications will be in their own scoring pool for 10 of the 20 GHG emission reduction points. It is important to note here that overall in the holistic program of TCC scoring, GHG scores have almost never changed in the ranking of the applications, but we do hear this could happen in our program, and it has happened in other programs. Lastly, previously conversations for ag, working in natural lands, was only explicitly ineligible for housing projects. We've made this ineligible across the board for all projects, but given some of the proposals that were received last year, we're making an exception for the disadvantaged unincorporated communities and tribes. And if there are better alternatives, we're still encouraging that process. And then all projects must still demonstrate location, efficiency, and connectivity. Next slide, please. And then the last category for updates are related to relaxing some of the threshold requirements to address application barriers. Planning grants can now submit a letter of commitment at application period. Pre-development costs were increased from 5 to 10%. For leveraging funding, we're reducing barriers to entry on match funding requirements, which will increase allowable standalone leverage up to 25%. Expanding timeline for grant application deadline to 1 year prior to the deadline will allow leverage that comes out of the TCC related community planning to count on. We also made several changes across all of the climate project strategies and transformative plans. The focus was on expanding eligible activities, as we were also encouraged to expand our definitions of climate resilience, especially around land acquisition, water efficiency and resiliency, recycling, health equity, and well-being. Expanded eligibility buildings from low-income housing to non-residential community service facilities for most project types includes solar installation, water efficiency, land acquisition, and new sets of community resources, centers, and supports services for activities eligible under the health and equity and well-being category. We also included some technical clarification to match updates within this field. Transit, and this again is in alignment with statewide practice where transit can be only zero emission now. Also, solar sizing caps were increased, as well as allowable costs for roof repairs and limited home repairs, which particularly, which is a particular barrier for low-income households. Go to the next slide, please. So after the council approval of the guidelines today, the TCC team will release the round 5 notice of funding of availability on March 8th, which is next week. And the same day that was kind of released last year for round 4. The application period is also going to be a little bit longer this year. This is extending it from a 4-month to a 5-month process. This is due from requests from applicants, as well as providing a little bit more time for staff to review and provide comment back. The round 5 award recommendations will be brought to the council in December of this year. Go to the next slide. So at this time, we're asking for the approval of the fiscal year 2022-2023 final Transformative Climate Communities Round 5 program guidelines. We'll turn it over to Matt.
If members of the public that are present would like to comment on this item, please submit a public comment card at the front table. To make virtual public comment, please visit sgc.ca.gov/meetings and complete the public comment form. I will now pass it back to Chair Sefa.
Great, thank you both, Amar and Lynn. Great, I'm excited about this one in terms of moving, learning from round 4, improving on that. I think a lot of the items that you touched on in terms of the guidelines are updating the guidelines and providing, tweaks and adjustments. It's great to see that. But I want to comment on what you opened up with, Lynn. Every now and then I think about sort of how this is becoming a model for the national government, and $3 billion being invested because of this program, the federal government. I think that's great. But it also speaks to, I think, the agility of the team or government in this case. While budget is being cut, well, there is a role to play in providing the technical assistance that really not only fills the gap because the budget is cut, potential is even more. Being able to empower those communities, go through this cumbersome federal, even the state application process is incredible. But to be able to have this team and program provide that technical support goes a long way in actually empowering these communities to be able to have access to that opportunity. And I think that is sort of a wonderful transformation and agility of the program. So I think, I'm excited about that as I am about guidelines. So I just want to make that comment. It's open. Irene, sorry.
Thanks so much, Chair. And thank you, Amar, for the overview. Thanks, Lynn, also. I love the proposal to support local jurisdictions, community-based organizations to go after federal funds. And I guess one thing that would be interesting to hear a little bit more about, not today, but in the future, and to be part of a discussion on, is how do you sort of align our funding with that, or how to best leverage that funding so that the applicants that are most likely to get that federal funding, there's not less of a competition, so that we're funding some of the ones perhaps that are less likely to get that federal funding, or vice versa. There's probably a timing issue there as well, in terms of when the RFP comes out, or if there's multiple rounds of federal funding that'll be made available. So we'll be interested to hear a little bit more about your thinking there. Really supportive of some of the other changes, like the alignment with ASIC, the AHSC, around limiting funding to zero emission buses and requiring all electric housing. Definitely support that direction across the board. Also really excited to hear about the project development grants and how that's going to make the program more accessible to really the low capacity entities. Thanks so much for all the hard work on this.
Great. Respond.
If I could just quickly respond to that. I think one of the ways that we're thinking about this original part of this contract is a little bit of a landscape assessment and then a bit of a triage. Because I think, to your point, what would be not ideal is if everybody's applying to both. And then if we can be organizing demand in a way that makes the most sense, we have that built into part of what the contractor will do. I think even kind of taking that thought a little bit further, or we've also been considering this idea of creating kind of a unit within our team that we would call connecting communities that would then be thinking more than just the TCC and then to the US EPA connection, a little bit more broadly about how those connections can be made and what we can be doing with our current grant dollars to help communities and applicants be successful in then getting to that next step within that process, especially while they're still working within our grant timeframe. So all of those things are kind of part of our thinking about how this initial state investment, this could be more catalytic. So we'll definitely come back with more information and more details as we start to work through the details of how that rolls out.
Great. Deputy Secretary Musavi.
Thank you. Yeah, just wanted to echo some of the comments. Thanks again, Amar, for the presentation. Yeah, also really excited about the new project development grant. I think much like this program has done in the past, this is yet again an area where you're taking the lead and helping innovate and figure out what the rest of us can do in this space. I think particularly looking at transportation projects, we've had a very hard time building capacity for new projects. There's a lot of projects in the pipeline, and I think this, the local capacity that this program can provide can certainly be helpful. Obviously beyond the transportation aspect, but in the transportation front as well, and it could be a model for us to think about in other programs that we have. The other thing I wanted to comment on in relation to that, speaking of programs that we have, is as you all think about this next round of implementation, I know I've mentioned this before, but we now have a Reconnecting Communities program, Highways to Boulevards pilot program here at the state, which we are very much actually modeling after the TCC program in many ways. And I know that the Caltrans staff has been in close coordination with SGC staff on it, but just given potential timeline and alignment of those funds rolling out, I wouldn't be surprised if there are applicants looking at both pots of money as they're thinking about how to move their project forward. There's going to be pretty significant overlaps, I'm sure. So just wanted to put that on folks' radar as something to make sure we coordinate on. We often talk about how to align our various funding, and this could be kind of a key and critical place to look at that. So. Thanks again for everything, and excited for yet another round of TCC.
So we'll go. Thanks. Go to Chancellor Munoz, then Deputy Secretary Cregan.
Thank you, Chair Sefa. Lynn or whomever, I'm just curious. The section about creating additional flexibility for California Native tribes, as well as the expanded eligibility for disadvantaged unincorporated communities and rural communities. Obviously, these changes wouldn't be in there if you didn't think that they would yield additional benefit in round 5, as they apparently in some version did in round 4. I'm just curious, this might be a bit premature and conjecture on your part, but do you have any sense of how impactful these changes will be, and in particular for the possibility of increased uptake by California Native tribes? I'm reminded of the point earlier, I think, that Nicole indicated about sort of smaller organizations not having the capacity of, in her example, a university. And at least the Native groups that I've been periodically familiar with, they have tremendously limited capacity. So any removal of barrier, I think, is something worthy of our attention. I'm just curious if you have any idea of how, again, impactful, significant you think these sort of modifications, both targeting those groups, but as well as the underserved areas and rural communities, might be in this round.
So we have been in close communication with our planning grantees in round 4, and in addition to other partners providing public comment, and they directly informed our revisions and updates in round 5. And so to that extent, we are hearing directly that these will be helpful, but we will have to see in round 5 how it really plays out.
Yeah. I appreciate that, and I'll just ask, I'll be interested, at least I will, to see what we learn. There's an aside. We often think that we have the right idea and the right formula, and then it turns out not to be the case. So we shouldn't repeat that in the future. In the future, we might have to look at different, sort of changes, right? So I raised the issue to say, I think this is wonderful what you've done based on input. And let's evaluate it. Let's look at the data to see that it yielded the outcome that we had hoped for. And if not, let's not surrender the idea of these modifications, changes, the greater eligibility. Let's look at just better ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do my best not to be repetitive because the other council members have already been summarizing some of the themes that are coming up for our agency as we were reviewing the guidelines. Fantastic job as usual, just to continue kind of as Chancellor Munoz was just saying, the ability to iterate in this program is really important and shows the commitment to community engagement. And so I know we're approving guidelines today, but like Chancellor Munoz, I'm already thinking about like, what do we learn from this process? So really want to appreciate the team for thinking about ways to remove barriers, not just to financial, which I'll touch on in a second, but by encouraging meaningful partnerships, even while removing some of the administrative barriers that community groups have found when navigating the application. So I'm very interested to see how that plays out. And then let's move to the financial side, because the reality is we need to keep removing barriers to communities and neighborhoods who haven't had the benefits of investment in the past. So really excited, of course, to see the advanced pay pilot to continue to come to light, and to the extent our agency can be helpful, as we've already had some of these authorities in other programs, we're always happy to partner there. But I actually think that the project development grant is a creative and really important complement to the advanced pay pilot. And I understand it's, hitting at a different angle, but again, it's removing barriers to people stepping into an opportunity like this and being able to move instead of saying, where is your leverage? And so very excited to see how literally those dollars can help plant seeds for change that communities are asking for. And then on the tribes in the same way, this where I just want to echo again, I think that these are all very meaningful and resonate with feedback that we've received from tribes. And I think this is the place that more than anywhere, we're very interested in a commitment to iterate based on how effective these tools are, so that tribes can ask for these waivers, or as you said, requesting modifications, great. And then let's just keep seeing how that feels and plays out in program administration. And then last, we are not dealing with $1 gazillion. And while we're thinking about ways to leverage and make communities competitive for federal dollars, I think, as Darwin mentioned, being able to tell the story about what does not get funded is also really important, so that we can continue case making for strategic investments that hit multiple goals. Thanks so much, Chair.
Anyone else? Great.
I would move the action item 5, approving the fiscal year final Transformative Climate Communities Round 5 program guidelines.
Vice Secretary Crawford,
I will second. Karen Ross.
seconded by Secretary Ross.
We have one public comment on this item. I'll begin the public comment period by reading the names of everyone who signed up to comment. We'll have in-person comment first. We have none. We only have virtual. So for virtual public commenters, when you hear your name, please raise your hand in the Zoom. You can do this by clicking the raise hand under the participants menu, which you can find at the bottom of your screen on the Zoom platform, or by pressing *9 if you're joining by phone. Please raise your hand if you have not done so yet. Oh, wait. So our first commenter for this item is Todd Isherwood. Todd, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
You may begin your comment.
Just quick comment. I think the Native American tribes will benefit tremendously from the Transformative Climate Communities program. Been listening in, and I believe the project development grant is the ideal stepping stone for several tribes that have looked at energy resiliency projects but didn't know how to actually implement them. And so I just want to say, I think it's a great idea for round 5, and I want to thank the council for putting that into the program. Thank you.
With that, we have no additional public comment.
Great. So we have a motion from Secretary Crawford and second Secretary Ross. Should be roll call, please.
Thank you. Chair Sefa,
Basically, yes.
Deputy Secretary Kurgan,
Yes.
Secretary Crowfoot,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Musavi,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary D'Souza,
Yes.
Secretary Ross,
Yes.
Deputy Director Radhakrishna,
Yes.
Public Member Capretz,
Yes.
Public Member Cardenas,
Yes.
Chancellor Munoz.
Yes.
Passes unanimously.
Great. Moving along, we are on item 6 now, which is a discussion on the 2023 SGC Catalyst Conference, the draft summary report. I'm actually surprised how soon right after the conference a report is prepared by this team. So I'd like to again invite Lynn one more time to present this item. Then we'll have a council discussion followed by public comments.
Thank you, Chair Sefa. Well, I just want to start with just an enormous thank you to the council and to the whole SGC team. I think when we came up with this idea of a conference, it was met with enthusiasm and a lot of support and direction from the council, a willingness to let us try something entirely new, and then also a team that brought excellent models and projects and solutions forward for us to be able to highlight and showcase and build a conference around, and then just an immense amount of thought partnership and action that it took to bring this conference to fruition. So just immense gratitude for everybody for making this happen. For just a kind of a quick summary for those who haven't been following this piece of work, on February 1st and 2nd of this year, we convened 261 leaders in Sacramento for our inaugural Catalyst Conference. And this was really focused on building partnerships and identifying solutions to implement the Justice 40 initiative in California, but also beyond. We brought in partners from federal government, state, local, tribal members. We had philanthropy, advocacy, the private sector, all invited, and it was just an incredible way to get together. We hosted this in partnership with the Milken Institute, and it really built on kind of our shared experience, both with SGC's experience on best practices, programs, and grant work, but then also the Milken Institute's knowledge and skill set in investment and really thinking through the capital structures and capital absorption within the state and elsewhere. So we are really proud to bring forward a summary report. You should all have a copy in front of you. And then for those who are listening in the audience, or who are watching this later, there is a copy of it included in the conference materials, and we will have it also posted on the Model Hub as soon as we make it final. But this is our very quick summary of what we heard at the conference. So we made the distinction of really making sure that we were collecting the information, building the conference in a way to elicit participation, input, feedback, responses, but then also to think about what's working and to highlight and to share where we can be learning from each other so that we're not consistently reinventing the wheel every time as we go through and really think about how we're going to absorb the immense amount of money that's coming through from the Infrastructure Jobs Act, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act and the California Climate Budget. So we think that this summary report provides a great reference guide, a place to start conversations, and we hope that it is a place where you continue to use it as a resource in all of our own work. So just a quick disclaimer that when you read through this, this is feedback shared by the participants in the panels and in the breakout rooms, and it's not necessarily recommending anything from the state or from SGC, but rather a summary of what we heard from those who were participating in the conversations. And so while the report goes into, a lot more detail, I just want to cover kind of a high level of what's in this report and how to use it. So it's divided into 4 sections, and then each section starts with bright lighting examples of what's working well. And then those examples include hyperlinks so that readers can get in and learn and explore and connect with those who are doing something that they're proud of and would like to share and think it has replication ability. Each section also flags obstacles and challenges, but then also provides areas for opportunity and solutions that participants brought forward. So as I said, we'll just go over very quickly some of the summary findings, but really encourage everybody to explore and to dig into this document. So the first section was on tribal access and investment. And before I go into the information that we compiled from this conversation, I do want to note that while we did have tribal members and tribal affiliated organizations in attendance, we only had one tribal leader. And so that needs to be borne in mind when you read this information. It's also an area of outreach and focus that will be prioritized for myself and my team next year as we do early and frequent outreach to make sure that we have tribal leadership included in this conversation. So what we heard was that while several state and non-state entities are actively shaping programs to meet tribal needs, significant barriers do remain. And that participants identified a lack of cultural competency on the part of state agencies and a tendency to view tribes as a single entity, with a lack of meaningful engagement that coupled with inadequate resources and persistent challenges in the context of program design and project delivery. Some opportunities that were identified were the establishing of a tribal green bank that leverages private sector funding for climate equity, the incorporating of traditional ecological knowledge of tribes within state stewardship processes, and the establishment of tribal set-asides within many of the state programs. The second category that we discussed was on pre-implementation, challenges, opportunities, and proven models in underserved communities. So it was noted that technical assistance and capacity building have become core focus areas in standalone programs and are also increasingly integrated into larger, more extensive programs. It was exemplified through initiatives like Council Priority 2, and that came up a lot in the conference, that there are real actions being taken to build technical assistance into more institutional models. However, participants did note that many programs still need to account for the wide variation in community readiness and apply for and deploy available grant funds, particularly over the long term. It was noted in many times complex application processes create a reliance on external technical assistance providers, which can be costly and don't always serve the interests of the communities. Now, opportunities that were identified by participants or those to address challenges include more stable funding streams for established state technical assistance program, simplifying and streamlining of application processes, targeted coordinated efforts that equip community-based organizations and other potential grantees with the resources and technical tools to access a broader range of public and private funding streams. Now, the third area of focus that we covered in the conference was on criteria, outcomes, and accountability mechanisms that underpin equitable investment in under-resourced communities. In this space, participants identified new actions and partnerships, including workforce development efforts, multi-sector collaborations, and talked about how to successfully embed equity-driven practices into program and project design. Participants did note that there's more work is required to allow for greater self-determination and to expand the scope and duration of funding opportunities to account for varying levels of community readiness and the inherent uncertainties associated with project implementation. Opportunities identified by participants included the expansion of proven effective strategies such as advanced pay, establishing cross-cutting statewide guidelines for state agencies to administer, and ensuring that we have accountability on federal funding that is subject to Justice 40. Also, on utilizing proven models of partnership and financing, such as community-based public-private partnerships and enhanced infrastructure financing districts to secure and direct funding opportunities in a more equitable manner. And the fourth area of focus for this conference was on sustaining investment, scaling infrastructure, and replicating outcomes in frontline communities. And this was a really important part of the conversation because I think as we think about making this transition from pilots and ideas to then thinking about how do you take that up into the billions of dollars of implementation, this idea of scale and replication becomes very important. So presenters discussed the tensions and challenges in coordinating, sustaining, and scaling infrastructure investment across diverse place-based contexts and pointed to models such as the community choice aggregation, virtual power plants, and community-based public-private partnerships to show potential for coordinating and scaling the rollout of climate-friendly technologies and services across diverse community contexts. Participants did note that doing so requires more stable and streamlined funding opportunities and a change in how private finance perceives financial risk and defines viable projects. Opportunities identified included modeling standardized project types that blend state and federal resources to address key California issues, auditing state programs to see where programs can leverage federal dollars, and creating agency-wide community-based partnership strategy to identify and address longer-term barriers faced by community-based organizations and other organizations. So one thing I just also wanted to share as well is that, over the course of the conference, participants were sharing examples that and approaches that they saw were working. And so while there were a lot of challenges and there was a lot of obstacles that were brought up, there were significant amount of work that's already being done. Lots of places where organizations, state entities, federal entities, philanthropic partners, et cetera, are already working very, very hard and to great effect to help lay the groundwork for how we invest these incoming federal and state dollars. And so one of the bright lights for me during this conference was how just raising awareness of all the different pieces that are already in place can help us be able to get to where we need to be on a more efficient pathway. As the closeout to the conference, we also, called for commitments from partners. We said, what are you doing that is going to continue to move this conversation forward? What is it you'd like to share or promote in your space where others can either connect, tie in, learn from, build upon? And so as you can see on the slide here, and then also in the summary paper, there were some really incredible initiatives that were, excuse me, that were both announced at the conference and where there is an active call for continued participation, support, and partnership. You can see we have on the slide 9 that are listed here. There are more in the summary report and information about how to plug in, how to use these tools and these resources that have been brought forward. So for the Strategic Growth Council, our next steps are we are going to do additional levels of tribal engagement. We are going to be working on regional roundtables to take the information from the summary papers and be able to share and showcase these ideas and these solutions, and also add more of a regional context to the findings. And then also, and I think this is kind of the core of the conversation we'd like to have with you all today, is we want to take this content and really think through what is it that SGC is going to focus on in the near term, and then also over the next 4 years. So as we have talked about kind of over the last couple months, we have a lot of opportunity to be working at the interagency level to be able to pilot and use our existing programs and strategies to identify short and long-term actions that we can take to support equitable and sustained transformation. But then also, as we get ready to bring to you our 4-year strategic plan in June, we'd like to use this time today to really understand what themes, key priority areas of focus you would like us to take back and build into our strategic plan. So we have a retreat coming up in 2 weeks, where then we'll take the feedback that we hear today and the direction, build that into our strategic plan, and then bring that back for your consideration in June. So with that, I'd like to hand it back over to Chair Sefa.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Lynn. Or Matt provides reminders for the public comment. I just want to note that I've been notified that we are receiving reports that there has been disruptive behavior in the Zoom meetings, in the chats for attendees of this meeting. Under state law, this body has the ability to remove individuals with such behaviors, disruptive behaviors. So I'm directing staff to warn and promptly remove any users whose behavior disrupts this meeting. So with that, Matt, would you like to provide a reminder for public
If members of the public would like to comment on this item, please submit a public comment card at the front table. To make virtual public comment, please visit sgc.ca.gov/meetings and complete the public comment form. I'll now pass it back to the chair.
Great. So again, thank you, Lynn, for that overview and report. I just have to say, I attended the first day of the meeting. I had to go out of the country after that, but I was just incredibly impressed in terms of the depth, content, and the kind of engagement that really exemplifies a lot of the work that we do in some ways in the abstract. It was really great to see the people that are actually doing the actual work, the implementation, or the people who are impacted by it from sort of multiple disciplines, from, as Lynn said, federal, state, local, philanthropic, tribal, you name it. It just brought it to reality in terms of hearing, seeing, and having that discussion in that space. And Secretary Crawford, thank you. Your space in your building was a great convener for that kind of discussion. So I was just really impressed. I wish I had stayed for a couple of more days. And I think there's a lot of substance there that we have to be serious, as you are, in terms of how we then take advantage of that and move that forward to help inform state government in terms of the, where do we need to tweak our work? Where do we need to remove the barriers? These are real feedback from the people who are directly impacted, or the people who are actually doing the rough work on the ground, whether it's the cumbersome bureaucratic application process that they have to go through, or the capacity that they don't have, with all good intentions that we have, in policy development and even granting. The rubber hits the road is really on the people who are actually making it happen. And this is, from the private sector, sometimes the public, but more importantly, the communities that are impacted. So I thought that was really a great launch of that kind of a conference. And it's also, and to me, just transformation of how government works and engages with communities to advance whatever policies that we're advancing. So I just want to say kudos to the team that conceived it, that put together this conference, and in a very short time, I have to say within 6 months. Usually this take about a year to put together. So I just want to say give kudos, and then hopefully my fellow council members would have good feedback in terms of your questions. That I just want to emphasize that this is just foundational in terms of how we transform ourselves in the way that we engage, and take criticism as well as feedback. We're good at talking about all the great things that we do, but I think we learn more about things that are not really working in the way that we do what we do. So there's no better way of informing ourselves. So I'll stop there and open it up for council members. Secretary Crawford.
Well, thanks and congratulations. You guys have clearly upped the game on a government-driven conference, and talking to a lot of people who had the opportunity to be there. I think to a lot of people, it didn't feel like the normal convening, and that's congratulations, because I know it wasn't meant to feel like the normal convening. From the dynamic, interactive elements that you had of the day, it's remarkable that painting actually developed, was painted during the day. Yeah. There were planters outside with, pithy explanations of things. The whole place looked incredible. So, first of all, congratulations on bringing everybody together in such a dynamic way. I was also really impressed to read the list of presenters and panelists, and it did not read like the usual suspects in state government, which I also understand to be intentional, where you're really bringing new voices to the table to help inform us and to change and transform the dialogue and conversation. So kudos there as well. So I'm really glad that you keep on using the word inaugural, because obviously the expectation is going to continue. So excited about that and looking forward to that. Also appreciate the just acknowledgement that we can do better in terms of engaging tribes. So a couple of concrete suggestions. One would be to ensure that there's a tribal member or tribal leaders on the conference steering committee. It's great that you had a conference steering committee to help crowdsource ideas on speakers and ensure that the discussions were relevant. And I think ensuring tribal participation and leadership on that steering committee will be helpful. And then as you think about how to deepen the work with tribal governments and communities, consider if you would, a liaison, a tribal liaison, or a set of liaisons at SGC. I think that would be helpful. Certainly, we've made so much progress with the racial equity work group and maybe a tribal affairs work group. We're on a journey at our agency to really learn how best to partner with tribes. And it's complicated because, of course, these are sovereign governments, and we're coming from a place of institutionalized disconnection and discrimination, et cetera. So we want to make sure to get it right. So I appreciate your level of commitment in that, not only to ensure that the Catalyst Conference centers tribal voices, but that the work centers tribal perspectives, but also partnerships. And then lastly, I'd say tribal set-asides are important. At the end of the day, tribal governments are not stakeholders. They are, governmental partners. And we're experimenting, and we're hoping to advance models of tribal, what as set-asides, to really ensure that tribes get those funding and are not in a position to compete against non-governmental organizations. So appreciate all that. Really energized that you all are having a retreat, and that will inform the strategic plan that you're bringing back. I think this is just the perfect moment to figure out how we want the SGC to continue to progress in the remainder of the Newsom administration. So really excited about that. And I'll just note that I have a sense of the growing energy and centrality of SGC in fulfilling its role as an entity that's helping lead and bring agencies together to meet shared goals. SGC was always a very ambitious vision, how these different cabinet level agencies and secretaries could come together. And I'll speak honestly, at times over the years, it's felt a little bit disconnected, because we're all so focused running down the field in our own silos. But I think you all have hit on a lot of transformative things around how do you help each agency and the agencies working together deliver on what we want to drive, which is community-led, equitable, sustainable development. And I know from listening to a lot of community members that too often it can feel so disjointed from state and federal government. We all think that we're achieving our goals because we give away money in a certain program. But if you're a community-based organization and you have to navigate a maze of state and federal programs, each with their own requirements and processes and timeframes, that's not success. So I think you all, one, strategic role is to help us achieve our goals of providing that from where you sit, which is helping us do our individual jobs better, but then ultimately align towards more impact. Secondly, I think building out the models, the transformative climate community is the ultimate model. And I think it's so gratifying that the federal government based their Justice 40 in part on the TCC. I think where there's more where that came from. So really building out models that we can emulate within state agencies, but also across other levels of government. And then also, lastly, I'll say developing this community of practice. The racial equity work group is a really good example where each of us in our own agency is trying to move forward, but in many cases, we're trying to invent the same wheel, which is not only inefficient, but is ultimately wrongheaded given how much work we have ahead of us. So I really appreciate you all figuring out where you can be that hub of really informed strategic collaboration. So each of us can move forward on the governor's goals and then collectively have more impact. So those are some fairly disorganized thoughts for your retreat. Throw the spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks. Thanks.
Okay. Else, those who are not here, please use your virtual hand or real hand if you're on Zoom.
Mr. Chair, if I might.
Yes, Councilor Candeño.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'd like to suggest that I did not find the prior comments from Secretary Crowfoot to be disorganized. Rather, I sensed a real coherence about them, because what Secretary Crowfoot is talking about is the confluence that at the SGC I think we've experienced in the last couple of years of vision and leadership. And I think that's what I saw in the time that I was lucky enough to be at the Catalyst conference, because what I saw was the realization of a vision that the executive director began to tease us into last June. as I recall, when she first suggested that there would be such a thing, that it might be called a Catalyst Conference, and that it might be a vehicle for learning not just what we're doing and how we're doing it, but what else we need to be doing in order to build a growth in this state that is as equitable and fair as it is sustainable. And what I saw, Mr. Chair, very personally, was people from all over the state, from all stripes and all backgrounds, including more than a few who are actually in government representing various silos, but being anything but disjointed. I saw people from many of your organizations, my colleagues up on the dais. I saw you and some of your subordinates hard at work, rolling up their sleeves with frontline folks up and down the state who are trying to get some heavy lifting done. I am almost constitutionally predisposed to avoid these types of conferences. I know they can be a lot of fun, but you know, there's work to be done. I took a chance that this would come close to what Lynn was suggesting it could be. I went in with high expectations, and frankly, they were exceeded. Just a couple of examples of the breadth and the depth of what was discussed, what was examined, and the beginnings of some hopefully solutions. When you look at this 26-page document, by the way, just to have a summary of findings and actions from a conference that just concluded that runs 26 pages is not a tiny accomplishment in and of itself. Just a couple of things I wanted to point out. When you look toward the end and you look at some of the action items that some of the participants and the sponsors have already announced and have already begun, just to call out a couple of them, our partners, the Milken Institute. This matchmaking role that they're taking on for themselves can be a huge compliment to what Lynn's staff is already doing in a lot of the really matchmaking work that they're doing in TCC, RCC, and other words. The Greenlining Institute, which was also very much present in accounting for during the conference. This Greenlining the Block initiative that they have begun in various strategic places across the country, including 4 locations here in California: Oakland, Stockton, the eastern Los Angeles County area where I get to live, and also down in San Diego. Their capacity building efforts to make sure that frontline communities are well placed in the queue for the billions of dollars in IRA and other funding that is coming down could be absolutely pivotal in making sure that new communities that we build are both sustainable and equitable. The only other thing I would add is both being at the conference, but I think it's also reflected in this 26-page draft summary report, is that the regional climate collaboratives, Coral Abbott's area, what her team is embarking on, that many participants, I think, in the conference already see as one of our new frontiers. There's an area that there's an opportunity there to take some of the best lessons learned from TCC and other efforts of SGC over the last several years, and to put them into play in new and innovative ways, and to collaborate with other climate resilience strategies that we've seen emerge over the last year, like SB 852, and this innovative idea of dusting off the old community redevelopment infrastructure financing mechanism and morph it into a climate resilience financing mechanism, which dovetails with community-based public-private partnerships, which was also discussed at the conference and is mentioned in a couple of different parts of the 26-page a summary report. So all of this is by way of suggesting that it was a hell of a conference. I think it's a hell of a start. I think it's a real testament to the staff that we have, particularly the leadership, our executive director, that envisioned it in the first place, but then leaned into a lot of good voices and hearts around the state, because as Secretary Wade said, when you look at the lineup of people who stood and delivered at this conference, it wasn't the usual suspects necessarily, but it was exactly who I think we needed to hear from and learn from. So I want to applaud Secretary Wade for his coherence in suggesting what the staff might want to think about when they go into their retreat. But again, I think moving forward, among other strategies in our arsenal, the RCC moving forward is going to be absolutely pivotal for our success. So congratulations to Len and everyone who pulled it off.
Secretary Crawford, that was by his standards. That was disorganized. You should hear him when he's really organized. You'll be blown away. Yeah. Deputy Secretary D'Souza.
Thanks, Chair. And first of all, congrats. I wasn't able to attend the conference, but from everyone I spoke to, everyone was like, it was amazing. So kudos to the SGC team for pulling it together and for the partnership with Milken. In looking at these questions, and I won't repeat what, fully agree with what Wade and Frank just mentioned, so won't repeat them. But in looking at the two questions you put together and those 4 areas that emerged as kind of key areas, I was kind of like, you're already doing all of those. You're already working on all those areas. And so to me, the fact that those emerged as key topics means that we need to be doing more in those areas. And part of it is that, if it was 10 or 15 years in the future, there would be more impact from the kinds of programs that you already have up and running and that are very successful. And I think in many ways, the TA and capacity building work that SGC is sort of piloting, it can be, not from the SGC perspective, but it can often be seen as add-ons to the main programs. But I think for the low capacity organizations, that is the main program, right? And so to the degree it's helpful from us to echo that with finance, with the GO, with the legislature, so that there can be more investment from SGC's budget into those kinds of programs. Happy to do that. We fully support that. Secretary Yana Garcia fully supports that, obviously coming from her background and everything. And then I would just also say that to me, SGC in these areas of equity, capacity building, technical assistance is sort of the vanguard, right? So I think Kieran and I worked closely together last year on the advanced pay pilot, and we get it. We all get it. But there were, in working with other parts of the administration, there was so much resistance, right? Like we managed to get the pilot through, but we wanted to have also advanced pay for sub-grantees. And that became something that other parts of the administration felt a little hesitant to move forward because of additional risks. And so working together to find ways to move along other more perhaps conservative or more risk-averse parts of the administration is something that I would love to see us talk about a little bit more in your strategic planning process. Again, congrats. It sounds like a really amazing conference and can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, your comment to the last comment, Shireen, I couldn't agree with you more. I think when you're transforming government, what it means is really shaking things up. And the structure of SGC, as Wade, you mentioned as well, is the right place to actually do that. It is a pilot, it's testing programs that we don't normally do in government, right? So the fact that we're learning lessons from that and taking risks there and then lifting that up to actually transform other agencies is an important function of this body. And I think the support from obviously the leadership in even taking risks. The way I think about it is, and I said this to Wade earlier, the kind of crisis that we're facing and the times are limited. We don't have time, 20 years to figure out how to transform government. I'm not saying we take unreasonable risks, but whether it's advanced pay or other barriers that we need to remove, yeah, we need to work within the legal bounds and all that. But there's no question that we have to question ourselves in terms of the way we do things and be able to take the risk to be transformative, but also the moment requires that, the moment we're in. We also don't have this kinds of great opportunity for a long time. It's a short moment. So with that frame of reference, I think we have to take risks, and there's no better place actually to do it and then lift that up. And the transformation in other governments, transformation means transforming people. I mean, what is government? What's an institution? It's made up of people. It's our job, leadership, to actually sit down and talk to each individual who make decisions in those institutions to help transform them so that they can transform government. We have our boss putting our feet to the fire in terms of being really bold and addressing the issues and not losing the moment that we're in, that we're given at this time. So all of that, I think, requires us for being as bold and as risk takers as he and as the moments require. Sorry, I'll stop there. And
I would just take the very rare occurrence of speaking twice because I know we're trying to be efficient with our time. But I'll say this, which is, every once in a while you're part of a conversation that sort of changes you, and that happened yesterday. We facilitated a discussion with Black leaders for Black History Month, and I learned from a former state parks director who told this incredible story of how difficult it was for him to actually get a state job, where he was discouraged as a young African American man interested in parks. He told us in our public discussion that the agency I represent actually had to be under court order to essentially desegregate its hiring. Those are the institutions that we inherit. And while we're so focused on moving forward, that word institutionalize is so critical because we're short timers. And at the end of the day, these institutions that we inherit bring a history and a culture. And while we're all as leaders and probably employees across the place, working to change is slow and hard fought. So the three words I was thinking of for SGC is experiment, align, and institutionalize. And I want to make sure that we get to the institutionalize before our time is up in these positions because it's so critical moving forward.
Secretary Radhakrishna.
Yeah, to build on these great comments, first of all, again, bravo and kudos. I had the honor to be there all 2 days and loved every minute of it. Wade put it beautifully, experiment, align, institutionalize. And I was going to say, building off of Chair Asefa's comments, go bigger and go deeper and further. So in terms of going bigger, equity is ultimately about the distribution of power and resources. And I love the Justice 40 focus. And we should absolutely do that with federal funds. The question is, what is our state target for our funds and other jurisdictions to the locals and other partners to philanthropy? What would it mean to not double down, but maybe double up to 80%? And so what is the California way for the future that we're going to take, not just for other people's funds, but our own funds and our influence to influence all the funds? That's going bigger. Second would be going deeper and further to, again, facilitate that TCC model with other partners and many of the things you're already doing, like Shireen said, you're the vanguard. So taking the aspects of tribal and rural and collaborative stakeholders being required and hardwired in, institutionalized for all forms of governance and fund distribution. A third idea is these competitive applications for billions are really good for consultants and those who are all resourced to do it and benefit from it. And as stewards and go-betweens, how can we level the playing field? By using data. We know where there's been historic disinvestment and where as Secretary Garcia says, there's the overlap and the intersections between pollution, prejudice, a lot of the isms that we see on our dashboard. So we know where we need to put the resources. Can we use data more equitably rather than complex competitive processes and applications to get the job done? Of course, coming from health, we want to see health baked in our analysis and being the #1 motivator for climate action amongst Californians, to have that be hardwired in terms of the tools and how we analyze and make decisions. And then finally, something I didn't see as much at the conference was the low carbon ecosystem infrastructure. Kind of behind the scenes, the reason we're here is we have caregivers and people farming and elder care and child care. And oftentimes that workforce can be very low vehicles mile traveled and also promote social connectedness for the society we want to create. So I didn't hear as many of those voices, and I think it's also part of the future that I'd like to see built into our thinking. I want to thank Wade for mentioning and acknowledging how with humility, there wasn't as much of the tribal engagement in the process. And one other thing I observed by being there also, I always try to ask who's not at the table, is youth. I'd often look around the room and ask, who's under 25, who's under 35? Adults got us in this mess. I don't fully trust us to get us out of it. And so as you move to strategic planning and for the subsequent regional or even annual events, I think it'd be great not only to have more intentional tribal inclusion, but also youth inclusion. Great job.
So much has already been said, so there's not a whole lot for me to add on to, but just want to make a couple quick comments. One, I am incredibly bummed that there's another summit I had to be at, and I wasn't able to attend. I feel like I missed the biggest party of the year. It sounds like everyone's been really excited and talking about this conference ever since. So really hoping to be able to make it next year. But the benefit of my absence was that we were able to have staff from some of our departments who don't usually get access to this kind of a conference be able to attend, and I talked to them about kind of their experience and feedback. And I just wanted to connect to the point that Secretary Crowfoot made about institutionalization, to say that oftentimes it's easy to have these kinds of conversations with folks who are actively working on this work, and that's really important. But to really make that change that the Secretary is talking about, we have to reach people who are not doing this work and bring them into this work. So, and I know it's often difficult with capacity issues of how many people we can actually have at a conference and whatnot, but thinking about how to make the conversations more accessible to people who don't usually think about the issues we're thinking about on a day-to-day basis, I think is incredibly important to expanding the reach. Much like the comment about youth, how do you make sure the next generation of leaders or folks who are not currently in this space or don't have access to this space get motivated to think about what they could be doing to further our equity, climate, and other goals as a state. So I think that would be my one thing to think about next year, and hopefully I will be there. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else? I will just sort of end. So the really incredible feedback in terms of what the next steps for your questions. And one thing I would just add would be, as you go through the focus areas, maybe obviously prioritizing, and in that, so we can't respond to all of the issues that came up. But as you prioritize, I think we're having discussions. The governor has asked us in terms of what his priorities are for the second term. And those are, he's given us his 5 top areas of priorities. I think that should be a guide in terms of, again, this are SGC, it's made up of multiple, state agencies. And part of our work is to implement and be effective in aligning those priorities to what the governor is looking for. And I think use that as a guide to connect the dots in terms of the priorities that he has identified in a way to, lead to your strategic plan. So that's one thing that I'll get feedback on. So with that, I'm sorry.
Councilmember Capretz's hand is raised.
Oh,
Sorry,
Nicole,
Chair
sorry,
Seppa.
I missed you.
No,
Please
I
go
came
ahead.
in at the end. I came at the end. Sorry about that. I just want to say really quickly, obviously I echo everything everybody has already said. I did have 2 team members who attended the event who are under 30. So there was some youth voice there. And my whole purpose at this point in my career is like training the next generation of advocates. So I'm proud that they were there and they loved the experience, and they're bringing all the lessons and feedback they got back to the communities we represent. For me, I will say that, this conversation is obviously groundbreaking. Sometimes I have to step back and recognize this moment in history, because I don't think the United States has ever been serious about transitioning our economy from fossil fuel to clean energy and centering equity and justice. And so it's kind of like surreal that we are having these conversations in a real way, and like money, like serious money is being put into this effort. So of course, rattling the cage is going to be hard and challenging. There's going to be ebbs and flows, and we have a lot of lessons to learn, but wow, it's truly incredible that we are all part of this. Really. I mean, one day we're going to look back, and I think it's going to be a highlight of our experience on this planet. So it's really meaningful that we're doing this. And I guess for me, and I have given this feedback to the staff, is that I think the top 3 kind of themes that you identified, the foundational themes, are what I see on the ground is the most necessary, because as much as the people who are in that room kind of know what the state is doing and understand some of these incredible, extraordinary programs that the state is implementing, I would say that in our community organizing work, the majority of low-income people and communities of concern have zero idea about it. And there's still a massive distrust of government and not understanding. And even the language that we use, the jargon, is completely not part of their way of relating to their lived experience. And so I really love the idea of a couple of things. One is like, how do we, I love the idea that you're doing regional roundtables. I would say, I wish you would go to every MPO, because it's not just a roundtable of like curated stakeholders. It's also, there's a lot of elected officials who also have zero idea about what you're doing, are resistant to what you are doing. But I just think really magnifying the benefits of what you're doing and how you're seeing it materialize is so special and game-changing, and could be invaluable. So I just would love for you to go on a roadshow, I guess. Roundtables are great, still have them, but even a broader roadshow would be, I think, really powerful. And I also really love the idea of, how do we reach more communities, as was echoed by, yes, let's use data. Like, this competitive process is also a barrier, and is also viewed, pits community-based organizations against each other. It pits neighborhoods against each other, because TCC is like a 5-mile radius. Well, communities of concern are much larger than that. And so what I see in San Diego is tensions, and, people who are like, wait, why people are comparing their struggles, when obviously everyone deserves to have a full, thriving life and clean air and, great public health, et cetera. And so I hate seeing that. And I just think, I know it's what nobody here or in the state wants. So, and something I said to Lynn was, could some of these billions of dollars just be grants, just given? It could be data driven, but in lieu of, and it could be the MPOs that then distribute it, or I don't really have a great answer to the mechanics of that. But it's sort of like when COVID hit and the federal government just gave everybody money, and there just wasn't like all these strings attached. And yeah, some of it maybe wasn't fully deserved by certain parties, but at the end of the day, the majority of people benefited. And I do think that helps restore trust in government, which is pivotal to like transforming our entire society. And so anyhow, obviously you guys didn't, amazing work. You're literally on the, what was the other word that Shireen used that I think was totally on point? Vanguard. Yes, absolutely. I'm so I can't believe I'm even a little small piece of this conversation. Can't wait to continue to be a part of it. And just like Wade said, ready for I think a lot of people said, ready for the next generation to do even more and better. But anyhow, those are my thoughts of just like, how do we touch even more people with this incredible, switch about how we're thinking about the future.
Great, thanks, Nicole. We'll now open it for public comments.
We have one public comment on this item, and it is an in-person public comment. Laura O'Connor, if you could approach the podium, please.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I want to echo Secretary Cropa and everyone who has commented on how incredible this was. I'm Laura O'Connor, first of all. I come up from Kumeyaay territory where I now live, but I lived for a long time in the Bay Area. And my brother Peter Bratt from Friendship House is here with me, and he'll just come in a second. But I wanted to say that since we came to the conference, and we came with another colleague, Roberto Hernandez from San Francisco, and Desiree from Allensworth, and had an incredible experience there. And I wanted to just give major kudos to all of the team. And we did have a conversation beforehand with with staff, with Lynn and Karen, introducing a conversation that we've been having for about a year with Deputy Secretary D'Souza and Bitta Becker, first of all, before she left, about a model that is possible and available that's been honed really well over the last year since these funds were announced. And I'll actually, since Peter Bratt's going to step up here and talk about it a little bit, there's an opportunity that we want to follow up on. Over the last year has really been fleshed out. Mayor Breed had a press conference announcing Friendship House in the Village as a model project of the Justice 40 the day before this conference. And so we would like to follow up with and share that. We're actually meeting with, congratulations to Moises Moreno Rivera. We're meeting with him right after this meeting to give updates, as Wade was introduced me to him last year. So I just wanted to re-offer that. And I also wanted to, I'm sure that you're all very aware the work that Secretary Snyder has been doing, Christina Snyder, around the state with the Truth and Healing Commission. I actually did have conversations with a couple of tribal folks after the conference, and I think there's a way to weave some of that together possibly, and you're probably already thinking about that, and they're happening. One of them was hosted at Friendship House, and Secretary Becker came, as did Ms. Thompson from Wade's agency, to bring folks together, as you all have been saying, so that folks across all of the agencies up and down the government can share the circle together, if you will, and
Thank you, Laura.
co-create this.
Can we have your
Thank
final
you.
thoughts? Thank you.
Okay, got it.
Next, we have Peter Brattle.
With the Friendship House Association of American Indians, which is the oldest and largest social service agency in the country, run by and for American Indians. And I really want to commend the council for, I was at the conference, I was inspired, came to the colleagues, and I think we all recognize that we're experiencing a historical moment, threshold of great change, and trying to figure out what that means and how we translate it into our communities. But I want to commend the council for pointing out how there's a need to increase inclusion of tribal communities. And within that umbrella, I want to point out that the majority of American Indians today reside in urban centers. 72% nationwide. In California, 92%, that's 7 in 10 American Indians live in cities. And a lot of those families, they came here under the termination policy of the 50s, which brought Native people to cities hoping they would turn into white people. That did not happen. There was a social movement that sprung up. American Indian movement, occupation of Alcatraz, Woodney standoff, fishing rights all up and down the state and in the Northwest. And a lot of tribal members, they live in both places oftentimes. In San Francisco, the Friendship House is going to be 60 years old. We're an inpatient drug and alcohol treatment center. We serve natives from throughout the state and the country. And oftentimes Native people are going back and forth. So while we choose to bring more focus to tribal communities, we cannot leave out our urban Indigenous brothers and sisters. They bring a lot to the table. There's a lot of excited movement making happening in urban centers. A lot of even our brother James Ramos, oftentimes, went to school in the city, come to get resources in the city. We work in hand and have contracts with several tribes in the state. a lot of the members come, graduate our program, and then reside in the city oftentimes for years, utilizing the resources within San Francisco. I just wanted to point that out and just commend all of you for the incredible work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. We have no additional public comment on this item.
Great. Thank you again for the public for the comments that you provided. The next item is public comment for matters that are not on the agenda. But before I move there, I'm going to open up public comment for item number 5, since we have a few minutes, and I know there's a person who signed up for that.
We had one additional public comment come in on item number 5, which is the TCC Round 5 guidelines. It's a virtual public comment. So when I call your name, if you could raise your hand, Olivia Seidemann.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for reopening the comment. I appreciate it. I hopped on late. My name is Olivia Seidman, Climate Policy Coordinator with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. We work alongside communities in the San Joaquin and Eastern Coachella Valleys on various environmental justice issues. And I really wanted to thank SGC staff for working with us on the guidelines, and we were really excited to see that they incorporated a lot of our feedback to the guidelines to make specifically to make the TCC program more accessible to disadvantaged unincorporated communities, or DUCs. We support a lot of these changes made, including the addition of the project development grant to serve as a bridge between planning and implementation grants. The increased flexibility in the ability to use local data to show that a community is disadvantaged, especially in the Eastern Coachella Valley where we work. There just isn't enough data for them to qualify in CalEnviroScreen as a disadvantaged community, even though it's a low-income, heavily pollution-burdened region. So we really appreciate that flexibility for when statewide data tools, aren't always able to recognize that. The flexibility with a larger project size area, and separating rural, DUC, and tribal areas from urban for the GHG reduction scoring that is really key when in rural areas there just isn't the same density to facilitate the same amount of GHG reductions. And we're also excited to see advanced pay, and just want to emphasize the importance for advanced pay for as much of the grant as possible. And we look forward to continuing to work with staff on incorporating more of our feedback, including that around improvements for leverage funding, which can still be a barrier for lower capacity areas, even with the increased flexibility in the guidelines. And also we want to continue to work on strategy 6 around recycling so that biomass is not included. So thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you. There are no additional public comments on item 5.
Great. So we'll move on to the final item on the agenda, which is public comments for matters that are not on the agenda. Unfortunately, this is not a forum for dialogue with the council members. Questions posed by the public during this item cannot be substantively addressed or discussed at this meeting. So any required follow-up can be directed to SGC Executive Director Lynn Bangkok-Liebert for follow-up answers and connections to relevant staff. So with that, we can start comments, Matt.
We have one person signed up for virtual public comment. They will have 2 minutes to make their comment. The timer will be presented on the screen, and if they're calling in, we'll notify you when your time is up. When you hear your name, please raise your hand in the Zoom. You can do this by clicking the raise hand function under the participants menu, which you can find at the bottom of the screen on the Zoom platform, or by pressing *9 if you're joining by phone. So if Alex Fair, are you with us? You may begin your comment.
Hi, my name is Vamsi Kotla, and I'm a colleague of Alex. So I'm an advocate for housing equity and sustainability. We're very privileged to attend the Catalyst event. I want to thank SGC Council, Executive Director Lynn Bangkok-Liebert, SGC staff for making this happen. I was able to meet the other housing and sustainability professionals, interact with state and federal agencies, and overall had conversations otherwise I wouldn't have had. So one thing I want to make a comment on specifically is something like Honorable Villaragos has touched upon. That is 80% of the budget for recent federal spending bills goes to infrastructure and things like mobility and electrification. But unfortunately, this is at the expense of affordable housing. So that means that if we go on the current path, we're going to fall short of 2.5 million homes by 2030, or realize the goals of Justice 40 initiative. Plus, there are serious obstacles to building new housing due to complex building codes and broken processes for approval of new building materials. So we please request the state to intervene, because the R&D funding for housing is 13 times lower than industries such as semiconductor and automotive. We can't build housing sustainably or affordably at current pace. So we request there's more funding for affordable housing, and importantly, more funding for housing innovation through programs like EPIC and AHSC. And see you at Rebuild 2023. Thank you.
That concludes public comment for this item. I will pass it back to Chair Sefa.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks everybody for the presentations. Good discussions. We opened this meeting with an acknowledgement of the passing of Kelly Myers, and I thought it would be appropriate to adjourn this meeting in her memory. Kelly Myers was a considerable asset to many state agencies, including Caltrans, CARB, the Energy Commission, the Strategic Growth Council, and many, many more within the state. Many of our staff have worked with her and her team for many years. Kelly provided so much support and guidance on tribal engagement and access for the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program. She was instrumental in how the TCC reached tribes and expanded resources, and was critical to the technical assistance guidance that SGC created, that many state agencies continue to use over the last few years to better engage with and serve tribes. Her legacy truly does live on in her impact. With that, in honor of Kelly Myers, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.